You text her something clever, and she takes 6 hours to reply with a single word. You walk into that meeting with a great idea, and somehow everyone's eyes glaze over. You're talking to someone at a party, and they keep looking past you for someone more interesting. You feel that burning confusion every man knows, because you know you're not doing anything obviously wrong. But something about your energy is screaming desperate and needy, and you have no idea what it is. The answer isn't your looks, your money, or your status. Carl Jung discovered something most men never learn: 4 specific behaviors that instantly broadcast desperation. And when you eliminate these patterns, you don't just become attractive, you become magnetically powerful. Carl Gustav Jung wasn't just any psychologist. He was the man who treated kings, artists, and the most powerful men of his era, men who had everything but were still struggling with their masculine presence. What makes Jung especially powerful for modern men is his deep understanding of what he called persona, the mask we wear versus who we really are. Unlike other theorists who focused on weakness and pathology, Jung recognized that men have an inherent drive for mastery and respect. In his work with successful but unfulfilled patients, he discovered something crucial. The behaviors that make men feel powerful are often the exact ones that make them appear desperate to others. Jung identified what he called compensatory persona, unconscious behaviors we use to hide our insecurities that actually broadcast them louder than anything else. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how this applies to modern masculine presence, and why most men never access their true power. Let me paint a picture every man has lived. You meet someone. Maybe it's a woman you're interested in. Maybe it's a potential business partner. Maybe it's just someone you want to connect with. The initial interaction goes well. You're feeling confident. Everything seems to click. Then something shifts. You can't pinpoint exactly what, but their energy changes. They become polite but distant. Conversations that flowed naturally now feel forced. You replay every word, every gesture, looking for the moment it went wrong. And you're left with that sinking realization: I came across as desperate, didn't I? That burning frustration because you genuinely weren't trying to be needy. You were just being yourself. But somehow, being yourself triggered some invisible alarm that marked you as low value. Here's what's really happening. You've activated what Jung called compensatory persona, unconscious behaviors designed to make you seem more attractive that actually have the opposite effect. Your psyche is trying so hard to prove your worth that it's screaming your insecurities instead. This isn't about being alpha or beta. Those are surface-level concepts. This is about understanding the psychological mechanisms that make some men naturally commanding while others constantly chase approval. And until you understand these 4 specific behaviors, you'll keep experiencing the same pattern with different people. The most dangerous part: these behaviors feel natural. They feel like what a confident man should do. But Jung discovered they're actually signs of what he called unconscious inferiority, and other people's nervous systems detect this instantly. The first behavior that screams desperation is over-explaining your decisions, opinions, and actions. You make a choice, and then you immediately launch into a detailed justification for why it makes sense. Here's what this looks like. I think we should take the highway route because, even though it's technically longer in miles, the traffic patterns at this time usually mean it's actually faster. Plus, there are more gas stations if we need to stop. And I've driven it before, so I know where the construction zones are. Jung would call this persona inflation through rationalization. Your unconscious mind believes that if you can prove your decision is logical, people will respect your intelligence and judgment. But here's the brutal truth. Confident men don't need to justify their choices to others. When you over-explain, you're unconsciously communicating several devastating messages. First, that you don't trust your own judgment enough to stand behind it simply. Second, that you need others' approval to feel secure in your decisions. Third, that you're so afraid of being wrong that you're trying to logic your way into respect. Jung discovered that truly integrated men operate from what he called quiet authority. They make decisions and trust that their judgment speaks for itself. When questioned, they might provide information, but they don't feel compelled to build elaborate cases for their choices. The psychological mechanism behind over-explaining is what Jung termed compensatory intellectualization. Your ego tries to cover up feelings of inadequacy by proving how smart and thoughtful you are. But people's unconscious minds read this as, "This man doesn't believe in himself, so why should I?" Here's the paradox Jung identified. The more you try to prove you're worthy of respect, the less respectable you become. Respect is earned through consistent action and quiet confidence, not through verbal dissertations about why you're right. The second behavior is the approval-seeking question. Is that okay? Do you like it? What do you think? Are you sure that's fine? You pepper your conversations with these little approval checks, thinking you're being considerate. Jung would identify this as external validation dependency. Your sense of self-worth is tied to other people's reactions rather than your own internal compass. Every time you ask for approval, you're unconsciously putting the other person in a position of authority over you. Here's what's happening psychologically. You're activating what Jung called the inferior function. Instead of operating from your natural masculine strength, which is decisive action, you're operating from uncertainty and need for permission. This creates what Jung termed energy drainage in your interactions. Think about how it feels when someone constantly asks if you're okay with their choices. Initially, you might find it thoughtful, but quickly, it becomes exhausting. You start feeling responsible for their emotional state. You begin seeing them as someone who can't handle their own decisions. The most insidious part is that approval-seeking feels considerate and mature. I'm just checking to make sure everyone's comfortable. But Jung understood that this behavior stems from what he called unconscious guilt, a deep belief that your natural preferences and decisions are somehow wrong or harmful. Integrated men operate from what Jung termed benevolent authority. They make decisions they believe are best and trust others to communicate if there's a genuine problem. They don't constantly monitor other people's comfort levels because they're not trying to control how others perceive them. The energy shift is immediately noticeable. Instead of feeling responsible for your emotional state, people feel they can relax around you. You're not requiring them to constantly reassure and validate you. The third behavior is what I call achievement broadcasting. Casually mentioning your successes, connections, or status symbols to impress people. Yeah, I was just talking to my friend who works at Goldman Sachs about this. Or when I was driving my Tesla yesterday. Or at the conference where I was speaking. Jung would recognize this immediately as compensation for unconscious inferiority. Your psyche believes that if people know about your achievements, they'll automatically respect you. But here's what's actually happening. You're communicating that you don't believe your natural presence is enough. The psychological mechanism Jung identified is crucial. When you feel the need to impress people with external accomplishments, you're unconsciously telling them that without these achievements, you're not worthy of attention. You're outsourcing your self-worth to your resume. Truly confident men understand what Jung called inherent value. Your worth as a human being isn't dependent on what you've accomplished or who you know. When you name drop or achievement broadcast, you're actually demonstrating that you don't believe this about yourself. Here's the energy people pick up on. Desperation for significance. Instead of feeling impressed, they feel secondhand embarrassment for you. They recognize that you're so insecure about your value that you need to constantly remind people why they should respect you. Jung worked with many highly successful men who struggled with this pattern. They had genuine achievements but couldn't stop themselves from mentioning them. He discovered that this behavior stemmed from what he called imposter syndrome, a deep fear that people would discover they weren't as impressive as they seemed. The integrated masculine approach Jung advocated is quiet confidence. Let your achievements speak through your actions and capabilities, not through verbal advertisements. When people discover your accomplishments naturally, through context or from others, the impact is far more powerful. The fourth and most damaging behavior is emotional reactivity when people test or challenge you. Someone makes a joke at your expense, questions your judgment, or pushes back on your ideas, and you immediately get defensive, angry, or start explaining why they're wrong. Jung would call this ego fragility under pressure. Your sense of self is so dependent on others' approval that any challenge feels like a threat to your identity. But here's what people are actually testing. They want to see if you're secure enough in yourself to handle disagreement without falling apart. This is especially crucial in dating. Women will test men constantly, not to be cruel, but to see if you're psychologically strong enough to be a reliable partner. When you react emotionally to these tests, you're failing them spectacularly. The psychological mechanism Jung identified: shadow projection in response to criticism. When someone challenges you, instead of staying centered in your own reality, you unconsciously project your insecurities onto them. You assume they're attacking you because you're secretly attacking yourself. Think about men you genuinely respect. When someone disagrees with them or makes a joke at their expense, how do they respond? They might acknowledge it, laugh, even agree if it's accurate. They don't need to defend their ego because their self-worth isn't under attack. Jung discovered that this reactivity stems from what he called unconscious shame, a deep belief that if people really knew you, they'd reject you. So when someone seems to be exposing a flaw, your nervous system goes into threat mode. The integrated response Jung advocated is what he called psychological aikido, using the energy of the challenge to demonstrate your strength rather than fighting against it. When someone tests you, they're actually giving you an opportunity to show your unshakable center. All four of these behaviors stem from what Jung called compensatory persona, the unconscious mask we create to hide our perceived inadequacies. The tragedy is that this mask actually broadcasts our insecurities louder than if we just owned them. Jung discovered that the masculine psyche has a natural drive toward what he called individuation, becoming fully who you're meant to be. But compensatory persona keeps you trapped in performance, constantly trying to prove your worth instead of simply embodying it. The shift Jung advocated is from proving your value to being your value. Instead of trying to convince people you're worthy of respect, you become so grounded in your own worth that their opinions become interesting but not essential. Now I'm going to give you Jung's solution for eliminating desperate behavior and building genuine masculine presence. The first step is developing what Jung called conscious awareness. You need to catch yourself in the act of these four behaviors. Here are the warning signs. For over-explaining. Notice when you're giving more information than asked for, or when you feel compelled to justify simple decisions. For approval seeking, catch yourself asking, "Is that okay?" or monitoring people's faces for signs of approval. For achievement broadcasting, notice the urge to mention your successes or connections to impress someone. For emotional reactivity, feel the surge of defensiveness when someone challenges or tests you. Jung recommended what he called the observer self, a part of your consciousness that watches your behavior without judgment. The moment you notice these patterns, you've already begun to break their power over you. Once you recognize the pattern, assess what's really happening versus what your compensatory persona thinks is happening. Ask yourself Jung's 3 questions. What am I actually trying to accomplish here? Often, you'll realize you're trying to control how someone perceives you rather than simply communicating. What am I afraid will happen if I don't do this behavior? Usually, you'll discover fears of rejection, judgment, or loss of respect. What would I do if I truly believed I was already worthy of respect? This connects you to Jung's concept of inherent value. This assessment breaks what Jung called unconscious compulsion, the automatic drive to perform these behaviors. Jung's most powerful technique, separating your authentic self from your compensatory persona. When you catch yourself in desperate behavior, literally think, this is my persona trying to prove my worth. My real self doesn't need to prove anything. Jung called this disidentification with the false self. You're not eliminating the persona, you still need social skills, but you're no longer letting it drive your behavior from unconscious insecurity. Practice what Jung termed centered presence. Imagine your worth as something inherent and unshakable, like gravity. It doesn't need to be proven or defended. Now comes the crucial part, replacing desperate behaviors with integrated masculine responses. Instead of over-explaining, make your decision and trust it speaks for itself. If someone needs clarification, provide it without justification. Instead of seeking approval, make choices based on your judgment and let others communicate if they have concerns. Instead of achievement broadcasting, let your competence show through your actions and capabilities. Instead of emotional reactivity, respond to challenges with curiosity and centeredness. Jung called this authentic masculine expression, behavior that flows from genuine confidence rather than compensatory performance. When you act from integration instead of compensation, everything changes. People immediately feel the shift in your energy. You become what Jung called magnetically present. Attractive not because you're trying to be, but because you're genuinely comfortable with yourself. Your conversations become more engaging because you're not monitoring for approval. Your decisions carry more weight because you're not second-guessing yourself. Your responses to challenges demonstrate strength because you're not defending a fragile ego. Finally, observe and adjust. Most men are amazed by the immediate changes. People listen more attentively. Women respond with more genuine interest. Colleagues take their ideas more seriously. This isn't theory. It's practical psychology that works. Jung spent decades helping men make this transformation, and the principles remain as powerful today as they were a century ago. In the last minutes, you've discovered something most men never learn: the 4 behaviors that instantly broadcast desperation, and Jung's method for eliminating them. You now understand compensatory persona, how to recognize it, and how to use this knowledge to build genuine masculine magnetism. But here's the brutal truth: knowledge without action is worthless. Right now, you're motivated and ready to implement this. But studies show that within 48 hours, you'll forget 80% unless you take immediate action. And while you hesitate, other men are already applying this and developing the presence you want. So here's my challenge. For the next 48 hours, use the mirror technique to catch yourself in these 4 behaviors. Don't try to change everything at once. Just notice when you're over-explaining, seeking approval, broadcasting achievements, or reacting emotionally. This isn't just self-awareness. It's the foundation of masculine transformation. Take action right now. Share in the comments which of these 4 behaviors you recognize most in yourself. This isn't just participation, it's commitment. And commitment separates men from boys. Thousands of men have already used this method. I stopped explaining my decisions and immediately noticed people respecting them more. I caught myself seeking approval and just trusted my judgment. The change in how people treat me is incredible. I used to get defensive when challenged. Now I stay calm and people actually listen to me. This isn't theory, it's proven psychology. If this video gave you a new understanding of masculine presence, hit that like. It tells YouTube to show this to more men who need it. Subscribe for more Jung psychology that actually works. Next week, I'm revealing something Jung discovered that's even more powerful. The one behavior that makes you magnetically attractive without saying a word. But it's the opposite of what pickup artists and self-help gurus tell you. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications because this is the kind of content that changes everything. Your future self will thank you for taking action today. See you next week, and remember, your psychology is your power.